on a little walk with Charlie today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the volume of commands and some misconceptions about like how you need to talk to your dog. Big thing that kind of was an old school and like kind of historically noted thing was that dog trainers and people who had control of their dogs would yell commands. They would speak in a certain voice that was air quotes dominant. It'd be like down, sit, come, heel, things like that. And in German they sound a little bit crazier. You're like Platz, seats. That's unnecessary. The reason why it's unnecessary, there's reasons why they're unnecessary. If you're training a dog from the beginning, if that's the way your dog was trained, then it requires some retraining to switch that to something else. I prefer to, especially with my competition dog, I prefer to basically whisper commands, especially when we're training. It's just very, very softly spoken. Assis, coucher, rest. And when I speak that softly, the dog knows I'm serious. How does my dog know I'm serious? It's because he's anticipating what comes after the command. So if I use a soft voice and then I provide reasonably consistent reinforcement after that, then the dog realizes that the soft voice precedes consistent reinforcement, which could be punishment, could be food, whatever it is. Historically, when dogs were trained using only compulsion, or a lot of compulsion, and the dogs that we're talking about here, I think that they would give a command nicely initially, and then when it didn't happen, they'd yell at the dog and then give a harsh correction. So what the dog realizes there is that when the person uses a louder voice or a harsh command, they are more likely to receive harsh punishment afterward. And that's what a lot is going on in people's homes, things like that, when they tell me, he only listens if I yell at him to do something. If he is not going on his bed or whatever, I have to get really, I got to sound really aggressive and like yell at him. I'm like, get on your bed. And what I tell them is that, if that's the only time that you're consistent with reinforcement in terms of putting in those guardrails and giving your dog a harsh correction when they don't perform the particular behavior that you ask for, if they only do that, or if you only give those corrections after you use a really like harsh, aggressive voice, then the dog thinks that's the only time he has to do it. When you're calm and friendly and say, on your bed, and your dog just walks into the other room, and then you get angry, on your bed, and you run and grab him by the collar, whatever, and pull him back onto his bed, he's like, oh, all right, well, next time he yells at me, I better go do the thing. As opposed to, all you really have to do is say, on your bed, and then go hook him by the collar, walk him over to the bed, put him on the bed. You don't have to use the harsh voice. It's that great, talk softly, but reinforce heavily, maybe. I don't encourage you to use a big stick. But the more you reinforce good behavior with consistent reinforcement and use your just regular voice, and I change my voice slightly. I don't use what I call a conversational tone. I definitely use my dog training voice, but that's just so that the dog can differentiate in the middle of a conversation. If I say sit, and then I go back to my regular speaking voice, so I create a little bit of a pause, sit, and then go back to my regular speaking voice. That seems to work pretty well. But if you're on the phone or you're talking to somebody, or you're on the street and your neighbor comes up to you and your dog starts moving and you're yelling, no, or sit down, something like that at your dog, like, first of all, you sound like a jerk. Straight up, you sound like a jerk. And no one's gonna think that you have good control over your dog. If your dog gets up and you say, no, and your dog sits right back down immediately, they're like, oh, wow, man, he's really responsive. Yeah. So I trained him that way, right? I trained him to be responsive to soft verbal commands. So as the dog anticipates properly what's going to come next, then you don't have to use a harsh voice. And, you know, most of the time, like, think about it with people, when you are using a harsh voice to another person, you're threatening violence, typically. It's like, that's kind of what's going on there. You know, if you're really opening up on somebody and, you know, yelling at them, it's like, oh, well, there's a threat of violence attached to that. And, you know, you don't have to train your dog that way. I mean, you can use corrections, of course, but you don't need to threaten them. Anyway, that was a thought.